Because nothing breaks my heart more than seeing a young, talented driver never being given the opportunity he deserves. And that's where we are at right now. And shame on Formula One every time they show one of these young guys in the garage standing there in team uniform with a headset on, looking at the data or whatever he's supposed to be looking at. Yeah, it's pathetic. Formula One wants to control itself with the teams being entities on their own, doing all this sports management, doing all this media. Then they've got to do it correctly. They can't just be limiting it to their own end all the time. Somebody needs to come in and say, get a life and get on with it. And Lewis is exceptional. He's unique, the only driver in the world who's managed to sustain that level of motivation and speed with that amount of success behind him. It's incredible that he's as good as he is even now. And for anybody to think that he's slightly off, they don't understand human psyche or they don't understand human athleticism.
Toto is mistreating / sabotaging Lewis Hamilton's efforts in 2024. To that, Mr. Windsor, you say?
Well, I say
hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour with my friend and yours, again for the avoidance of doubt, the goatiest F1 broadcaster to have ever F1'd, Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well. Cam. Thank you very much. A little bit in mourning. We lost Françoise Hardy last week. Those of an age will remember her for being Lisa in Grand Prix. She's also a very good singer, songwriter. And I must say, at the time when Grand Prix came out and Françoise Hardy hit the big screen, we all went out and bought her albums and everything. And any pictures we could get of her, we had them. And she was just an icon, really. Françoise Hardy summed up, in many ways, Formula One in the 60s. And yeah, it's very sad to lose her. And I know that we want to get on with the show, Cam, but I got to tell this little story that at the Belgian Grand Prix one year, about 2005, I think 2004 maybe, I decided to stay in Bastogne, which is quite a long way from Spa, but I wanted to go there because I'd never been to Bastogne. Obviously, it was the focal point of the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. And I wanted to go there just to see some of the terrain where the battle had taken place and to look for perhaps some stuff out in the forest, which I did. And while I was at Bastogne, and I stayed there for the 3 nights for the Grand Prix, I noticed a poster advertisement that Françoise Hardy was performing live, singing, with a guitar, folk songs as she did, in Bastogne on that Saturday night. And I was absolutely devastated that I couldn't go because I had to do something that Saturday night. But I went to Bernie at the track on the Saturday morning and said, Bernie, would you believe Françoise Hardy is performing in Bastogne on Saturday night? Why don't we get her to the Grand Prix on Sunday and have her in the pace car or something? It'd be just so cool to have her in the pace car at the front of the Grand Prix. And Bernie said, nah, later up rubbish, and just walked away, as he often did with all my suggestions, or most of them anyway. So I thought that was a missed opportunity, actually, because I would love to have met her. I'd love to have seen her. And I think quite a lot of the pit lane guys would have loved to have seen Françoise Hardy, because most of them have seen the movie Grand Prix, Anyway, that's my little story for the day.
I love a cheeky story time with Windsor, mate. More of the same. Go on then. Should we talk some F1-age?
Yeah.
There's been a lot.
Far away.
There's been a lot going on, mate, as far as the post Canadian Grand Prix action. First and foremost, I'm going to talk to you about Jacques Villeneuve's comments about Danny Ric. You'll be aware that Jacques Villeneuve was less than polite, let's say, about Danny Ric's career, criticising him for basically underperforming since he burst on the scene circa 2018, handing one Sebastian Vettel, 4-time champion even, his behind. Jacques Villeneuve was not very polite and received a lot of criticism. What do you make of Jacques Villeneuve's comments, Peter? Was he telling the truth? Has Danny Ric underperformed in recent years and been living off his personality?
I think Jacques was true to himself in the sense that he was expressing his opinion. So you have to respect him for that. Unlike a lot of people in Formula One who tend to be unopinionated and just go down the middle and never express their view because they're so worried about repercussions or whatever. I mean, I do respect Jacques for that. and he has been pretty critical in the past, I think, of Lance Stroll, probably justifiably so. But Danny Ricciardo, I mean, from my point of view, I didn't see it. I don't watch whatever TV channel he was on. But um, from my point of view, Daniel Ricciardo was absolutely brilliant at Red Bull in the last year, and which basically of Vettel, which basically forced Seb to leave. I think he just couldn't believe he's getting blown away by Daniel, and therefore he went to Ferrari, and his career sort of stagnated thereafter. So you cannot say that Daniel's Red Bull career was disappointing. The big criticism I've always made of Daniel is deciding to leave Red Bull because he just didn't like the way it was going with Max. And I think that was a massive mistake that he made. And I will always say that. I think he should have stayed at Red Bull. He hadn't won a championship. He was going to win a lot more Grand Prix. Yes, there were areas where Max was going to be better than Daniel, but Daniel's very, very good in a lot of areas. And he would have been better than Max in a couple early on, for sure. And that was the mistake he made. And then when he took the money, went to Renault, then he lost his internal, whatever it is, the burning ambition, fire, whatever you want to call it. And he's kind of getting it back now, but it's a bit late, obviously. But he's still, put him in a good car, good balance, and in a reasonable situation in a Grand Prix. And he's still going to put in a very, very good Sunday afternoon. Got a lovely touch, and he's a very, very good racing driver still. So I mean, if Jacques saying he's finished and he's over the hill and all that stuff, then that's way off the mark, I think.
Is it not the case though, Peter, that in June of 2024 that the competitive landscape is such that there are so many? I mean, Teo Pourchaire and Felipe Drugovich, most recent winners of F2. Should F1 not be more ruthless in terms of its roster? Is there still room and space for the likes of Danny Rick and Logan Sargent, because the guys coming up behind them, Jack Doohan, Liam Lawson as an example, because the landscape is so competitive? Do we need to kind of get rid?
Well, that's a completely different subject. I mean, I'm not saying that I think Red Bull did the right thing in rehiring him this year for Alpha, what's it called, Visa Cash app.
Yeah.
But so that's a different subject altogether. I mean, I was speaking then purely from the perspective of Daniel Ricciardo. If he's got the offer, take it, and he's still quite capable of putting in a very, very good performance. The other subject, of course, is an enormous one, and it's always been the case. There have always been examples throughout my time of watching and being a part of Formula One, and before that, of young drivers never being given the opportunity that they deserve, purely because there aren't enough seats, or because they don't have enough money, or because this or that. And that's always a crying shame. And we have a lot of academies now, and we have a lot of support for younger drivers to come into Formula One, but we don't really have a proper progression once they're kind of on the block and ready to go into Formula One. And you're absolutely right. And I pointed this out in my live streams. Now, you've got Formula 2 champions who are having to look elsewhere for their racing. I mean, the case of Felipe Drugovich, as I said, the millisecond he signed that Aston deal, I said, what a complete waste of time that's going to be. And it's so sad to see him just standing in the garage doing nothing. And Teo, yeah, bless him, is in IndyCar now and enjoying it, making a go of it. But he deserves to be given a proper Formula One opportunity. Frederick Vesti, another one, Liam Lawson, obviously the list goes on. And that's why I constantly say we need to have a second division Formula One championship. Give it a different name if you want, but it needs to be in last year's cars, or anything but this year's cars. It can be 2 years old, 3 years old if you want. From the Formula One teams, they need to be the drivers that are on the edge of getting into Formula One, and they need to be at racetracks and venues and Grand Prix, give them the title, in countries, locations, territories where there isn't yet enough money to put on a Grand Prix, but there's a lot of interest. South Africa, several South American countries, India, some of the Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam, good example, Thailand, probably another. Get these countries into a properly run championship with all these young drivers that in races that don't clash with the Grand Prix calendar, and give it its own TV rights and its own independence, its own sponsorship, its own organization, obviously sanctioned by the FIA, part of the Formula One envelope. And let's go for it, because at the moment it's just ridiculous. The waste of young talent is crazy.
I concur, Peter. It breaks my heart to see the lights. I mean, Oscar Piastri, right? 2 years of his career just sat on the
Yeah, but
Alpine pit wall. What are we
yeah,
doing?
but I mean, he's one of the lucky ones, you got
Yeah.
to say, and he deserves the luck that he's got because of the talent. You can't say that he doesn't deserve to be there. And but yeah, it took him it was okay because it was pretty clear he was going to get his opportunity. But right now, if you're not Kimi, you're not going to, you've got very little chance of getting into Formula One. And he's another lucky one, you could say. At least Mercedes have recognized his talent, and at least they're going for it, and at least they're going to give him an opportunity. But there are so many others out there. I mean, Vesti, very good example, very talented guy. There's a short corner driver for you if ever you wanted to see one. Poetry in motion. Yeah, he needs road dust. He needs more experience, but he's done a lot already with Mercedes behind the scenes. And to see, he for sure would go well in any midfield Grand Prix car, no doubt about it. And I think one of the problems, and I think I mentioned this to you in the last chat we did, one of the problems is the teams love to have these academies, and usually they're self-funding. A lot of drivers paying to be in the academy, and it's basically money for nothing for the Formula One teams. But in reality, the team should have to put a lot more into it, and they should be out there really helping these drivers raise the budgets they need in order to progress in their career, and whether it's going from F3 to F2 or F2 then into F1. And the teams have the wherewithal to do that. Yes, there was a fight for a while between what the teams wanted to control and what outside management agencies like IMG and others could do, Octagon. And in the end, the teams have won the battle. They've now got their own media, they've now got their own management, they've got their own this, their own that. Okay, if they've got it, then use it, please, because at the moment it's not happening. And if you are a young driver contracted to any of the Formula One teams, it's very difficult still to go out into the marketplace and say, I'm a Sauber driver, I'm a Ferrari driver, I'm a Williams driver, whatever it is. I'd like to arrange a meeting between the Williams team and this company, and I'm going to be the young driver, and I want to raise this amount of money, blah, 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 blah. Very difficult to do that because they're so nervous about treading on the toes of the other sponsors, the other partners, this and that. And, you can't do anything without the permission of this and that. And it might interfere with what the other drivers are doing. And it's all too complicated. And I'm coming back to my point. Formula One wants to control itself with the teams being entities on their own, doing all this sports management, doing all this media. Then they've got to do it correctly. They can't just be limiting it to their own end all the time. Somebody needs to come in and say, get a life and get on with it. Because if motor racing was structured differently, and a company like, and I keep saying IMG, good example, golf, tennis, other sports, even as far as ballet and so forth. If you're a young athlete with a lot of talent, you get signed to IMG, there's a 99% chance you're going to be able to fulfill your talent in your chosen career. IMG tried several times to do that in Formula One, and every time they were kicked into touch by the team saying, we control the drivers. IMG can only have one driver. They can, as soon as you have more than one or two, there's a vested interest and so forth. And so they all just backed away and said, okay, we'll leave it to Formula One to sort itself out. And look at the mess we're in. We've got all this young talent and we're not using any of it because the teams are always going to the driver who brings, in a balance, the most money for the most talent. And that's where we're at. And it's very wrong. It's very, very wrong. And I feel very passionately about this. I've felt passionately about it throughout my life because nothing breaks my heart more than seeing a young, talented driver never being given the opportunity he deserves. And that's where we are at right now. And shame on Formula One every time they show one of these young guys in the garage standing there in team uniform with a headset on, looking at the data or whatever he's supposed to be looking at. Yeah, it's pathetic.
Peter, you've nailed it, sir. It is pathetic, and it breaks my heart too, seeing the likes of Teo and Oscar on the Alpine pit line. And
sorry, let's just sorry to interrupt, but Linus Lundqvist, another very good example. I've known Linus since he was in Formula 4, and there was no doubt at all that the guy had extraordinary talent. And anybody who'd taken the trouble to go to Pembury on a wet Wednesday afternoon to watch him testing in a Boyo Formula 4 would have realized it straight away. I didn't see any Formula One people there. I didn't see any Formula One people around Linus when he clinched the British Formula 3 Championship, or when he went over to Daytona to do the Sunoco drive, or when he went to Indy Lights. And so he got no offers, no interest at all, went over there. Now look at him, pole for the last IndyCar race, just got his first podium. I mean, what is wrong with these people? They live in their own world, and they just cannot in any way bring themselves to go to Pembury in the wet on a Wednesday because it's too difficult. We'll go to the guy with the biggest motorhome in the kart race. That's the thing. He's obviously got the richest dad. And that's how they all operate now. Very, very sad.
So solve for this then, Peter. Like, what's the panacea? How do you fix?
Well, the panacea is certainly to have proper agencies in there running the management of the drivers and looking. The problem with driver management and Formula One again is it's a victim of its own success in a way. It's not about can we get him into this team or that team. It's about raising the money, and nobody these days wants to go out and do that. That is the difficult thing. That is the thing that is absolutely deplorably difficult, particularly in the economy in which we find ourselves now. Raising the money, and the money that these guys have to raise to do Formula 3, let alone Formula 2, let alone Formula 1, is totally absurd. The only way they can do it is if they ride on the back of Formula One's wave of success around the world, on Formula One's television, on Formula One's exposure in social media and all the other aspects of it. And because Formula One likes to control all that in a very, very tight way, it's impossible for young guys, even if they're associated with Formula One teams, to use that huge platform to generate money for their own career. They can't do it. And so who can? Who benefits from all this? The young guys certainly don't benefit in any way from the big platform that Formula One has. And that's the problem. It's the raising of the money. And you can't use any footage from Formula 3 or Formula 2 without paying a fortune for the rights. If you're a driver competing in that championship, you can't get into the Formula 1 paddock with a potential sponsor and introduce him to Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc because he's a big fan and try to get him excited. You'll never get a pass to do that. They make it as difficult as possible. And then it all comes down to the lowest common denominator, which is the guys with the richest fathers. And that's the problem. And Bernie and Max, when they decided to kill European Formula 3, if you like, and create this, GP3, GP2 ladder in which it was all controlled and owned by Formula One, their basic philosophy was, there were going to be 26 idiotic fathers with enough money to blow on their kids racing. We don't want them in the paddock. We don't want to give them any hospitality. We don't want to give them any TV rights. We don't want to give them any marketing facilities. And guess what? That legacy still continues today. It's completely wrong. The people that need the opportunity the most are the young guys out there who are trying to raise the money. And guess what? They're the ones who have got the most drive to raise the money as well, because that's their careers at stake. They do a brilliant job. Racing drivers are very good people when it comes to making a phone call. And if you're the chairman of some company in the United States that's just gone public and you're worth X amount, and the phone rings at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's a young American driver saying, I'm a race driver. I've just won this karting championship. I've done this, I've done that. I'd love to see if I can come and have a 10-minute chat with you. He'd probably take the call and he'd probably do it. But they don't do that because already they're signed to some ridiculous contract where they're not allowed to make approaches on their own. They've got to do it through the team and all this rubbish. And, it just doesn't happen. And it's a great shame. I mean, the ability to go to do what Guy Edwards used to do and basically just go out and put deals together that makes sense has gone completely now. It's controlled by the Formula One teams, and they have to do it their own way. And 9 times out of 10, the ways they do it are not very good.
Yeah. It is Formula One, though, to play devil's advocate, Peter, not a victim of its own, not insubstantial monetary circumstance. Can we ever get back to the essence, the thing that you're talking about, be more connected with both audiences, drivers, just kind of freeing up that pathway for a Felipe or a Teo, or has the behemoth that is F1, has it gone too far? Are we never going to see those days again?
It's not. I don't blame it on the behemoth. I don't blame it on the success of Formula One. I just say it's selfishness. It's human selfishness. The more money people or entities have, the less they want to give away in general. Obviously, there are philanthropists out there, wonderful people who break the mold. And we don't know who they are because the true philanthropists never go around advertising what they do anyway. But if somebody at the top of Formula One, and I don't think it's the responsibility, to be honest, of Stefano Domenicali. I think it's the responsibility of the teams collectively to say, we are unbelievably fortunate to be in the situation we're in. We like to think that we deserve it because we work so hard, but there are billions of other people out there that work just as hard as we do, and they're not fortunate. They don't have the franchise that we have. They don't have the paper wealth that we've got. We've got to put something back into the sport, and we all collectively need to put 10% or whatever percentage it is aside to help young drivers get into Formula One and create proper ladders around the world for the creation of talent, particularly in territories where it's very difficult to make it. And I'm thinking obviously of countries like South Africa or India, good examples. And we need to be progressing Formula One in that way. And if it involves us putting our hands in our pockets and paying for this, then we have to do it because we're fortunate. We want to put it back into the sport. That's no different from Wimbledon saying every year, we're going to put X percentage of our profits into the future of British tennis. It's no different. But we don't hear Formula One teams saying things like that. You see them doing a lot of things that tick all the boxes of being socially correct and politically correct. You see them ticking all the boxes of all the things that could be beneficial for them in terms of their image and potential standing with the current partners. But you don't actually see them saying, yeah, we're going to put money into young guys, young drivers, girls and guys. I really upsets me because, as you say, you mention all these talented young drivers and they're standing on the sidelines watching drivers who are well past their prime still out there in Formula One.
I couldn't agree more, Peter. And it feels like Esteban Ocon may be the latest in a long line of pay driver victims, right? As he contests, tries to find himself a seat for next year. Rumour on the F1 curb is that it's a bit, from Haas's perspective, it's between Esteban, Ollie Behrman or Zhou Guanyu, courtesy by virtue of the fact that he's got $30 million worth of sponsorship behind him. Like, I don't know how we unwind.
Well, is it
for
sponsorship?
This
I think it's family money, isn't it?
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Well, it has been for a lot of his career. Maybe on the back of being in Formula One, he's got a few Chinese sponsors. But yeah, there's always been a massive amount of money, and of course that does make you always a bit suspicious of a driver's ability and talent. And yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you don't have to be that good to look half reasonable in a Grand Prix car 50% of the time. They're not that difficult. I mean, to be absolutely the top and to get the maximum from them all the time, completely different subject, especially a bad car. But yeah, there are plenty of Zhou Guanyos around. Absolutely. Not many with that amount of money. So probably the axe will fall with him. But yeah, a guy like Esteban Ocon, I don't think he's got a massive amount of money. I think if he was Mexican or if he was from Venezuela, he'd probably have a lot more opportunity to get local backing, national backing, if you like, to raise the money. But yeah, it's going to be difficult for a guy like Ocon if he can't bring a budget to keep his place in Formula One, for sure. And it'd be difficult for him to raise a budget, I imagine. And that's a great shame that it is like that. I mean, for me, for Haas, the big conundrum with Haas is why they don't. I know they'll take Ollie Behrman. I imagine Ferrari will want to see him racing, won't they? But especially if Kimi's in the Mercedes. But the shame really for me for Haas is that they don't have much more of an American feel to the team, and it's an opportunity now to get another American into Formula One and to have a good young talented American in that other car. I'm surprised they don't do that because, yeah, the short-term benefit is either with Ferrari, with Behrman, or money with Zhou. But then if they ran a young American, they could probably do a lot more with corporate America in the medium term, I would imagine. But anyway, that's just me and my marketing brain.
The criticism of no, it's a good shout, Peter. The criticism of Haas has been though that they haven't. It's almost a missed opportunity, right? That they didn't sign Logan as an example and do what Drive to Survive has done so brilliantly in captivating a North American market, right? And Gene Haas, is he even interested in that? Does he even want to continue investing at the level requisite for Formula One success? Like I don't know, Peter. This is
I think Gene is just a very, very private, quiet person, and I think he just wants to sort of go along and not make too big a song and dance about it, and do as well as he can, and hopefully one day win some Grand Prix. I think that's what he wants to do, and I'm only putting two and two together, maybe getting five, but I suspect that beating the US drum from Gene's perspective probably looked like it was a bit too raucous and a bit too rah rah for his personality. Maybe I'm guessing that, but I may be wrong. He's a pretty quiet guy. Nice
Yeah.
guy, very nice guy. Very,
Okay.
very talented as well, but hardworking. But he's low profile, that is for sure.
Yeah, keeps himself to himself. Right, let's talk about the Canadian Grand Prix,
Mm,
sir, if we can, very briefly.
yeah,
Because there's a couple of themes
yeah.
that have developed
It was an
since.
interesting race. I
It,
mean,
it
there's so much going on.
just a tad. Eh? Talk to me about Max Verstappen's performance, because some have said, as far as the driver of the day voting, that Esteban Ocon ploughing his way through the field was more worthy of a vote than was Maximilian Verstappen. What do you make of that, Pete?
I don't make anything of it at all. I thought Max was uh, stunningly good. Well, I just think the last 10 laps he drove in that race were, in terms of 10 laps together, were probably the best 10 laps he's ever done in his life.
Oh,
I don't think the Red Bull was as good a all round package as the McLaren at that point. The McLaren had the benefit of DRS. The tyres were 2 laps newer on Lando's car. And already we'd seen how drivable and chuckable and comfortable that McLaren was to drive on intermediates. So when the safety car, the Red Bull induced safety car, completely annihilated Max's 5-second lead, I thought, yeah, for sure Lando's going to get him. It's going to be last 2 or 3 laps, DRS. And Max was just superb. I guess it was because, looking at it now, I think it was because the tires lost temperature. And when the tires were still cold to warm in the first 2 laps after the restart, Max was just perfect on those 2 laps. And I guess at those moments, Lando might have had the odd bobble and maybe lost a tenth here or a tenth there, and then maybe he overcooked the tires a little bit in trying to make up for that, and then Max was gone. But I say gone, he was never more than a second or 2 seconds. I mean, Max only had to make one tiny mistake, touch one curb the wrong way, and it was all over. And he didn't. He just drove those 10 immaculate laps. So for me, that was, all bets are off. That was the drive of the day for sure. We're just based on those 10 laps.
yeah, I don't hate it, Peter. And I mean, what characterises Max's performances over the past few race weekends is that he just doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Similar Red Bull as a team, right? Mistakes of consequence. You just don't see them making them. I'm like, who is this fella? He's just some sort of like robot F1 driver that I
Well,
don't.
I mean, you say that there were 2 things in Canada. One was that business of pushing Max out into the pit lane queue at the beginning of Q2. That was a bit
Mm,
inelegant, wasn't it? Not quite
yeah.
sure what that was all about, and we never saw actually how it began. So, well, I didn't anyway. So it just looked a bit odd, and it's not really the sort of thing you'd expect of Red Bull. And of course, the other thing was that radio message to Perez, which we now know about, saying drive back to the pits, try and prevent a safety car. I mean, that's not only a mistake, that is unbelievably bad, I think, to have done that. And I wonder if it's happened before and it's just escaped everybody's notice, particularly the steward's notice,
It's,
or whether that's the first time any team has ever done that. I like
oof.
to think the latter, but if it is the latter, then I don't think the penalty they got was actually severe enough. I think that was really, really poor.
Yeah, no, Will Buxton's come out and said that that was akin to almost a reverse crash gate, but should be taken just as seriously, right? That Red Bull were acutely aware that had they parked the car, that potentially would have brought out another safety car, which could have impacted Max's ability to win the race. And fringe, Peter, they race hard, and I think sometimes they do one of these as far as safety is concerned, and that was one of those times. They shouldn't have done it. I agree with you. Should have left him out, but again,
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously there's grey area because the team may be saying to Perez, how bad is the car? Can you drive it back? And Perez might have said, yeah, it feels okay, because he might not have seen all the damage. Okay, see if he can drive it back, then we can prevent a safety car. If it's done like that, it's not quite as bad as saying, regardless, try and drive it back. We don't want a safety car. We don't want to kill Max's lead. There's two different things there. So we need to actually hear all the radio, which I don't suppose we will. But
I think,
so
Peter, they said they said drive it back. They commanded.
Well, yeah, but did they say beforehand how bad is the car?
Well, you could see it, right? Because it was bloody, the wing was hanging.
Could you? You couldn't really. I mean, it was in the shade there. You couldn't really see, and the camera can be a bit deceptive. And it only needed Perez to say, no, the car's okay, which is what most drivers say when they've had a shunt, even if the half the car's hanging off. They always like to say, oh no, it's not too bad. So we have to have that mitigating factor in there. But even so, I mean, I suppose on one side it shows the level of the racing mentality at Red Bull. It's just absolutely ruthless. But at the same time, it's something that needs to be jumped upon, because that decision ultimately should always be in the hands of the FIA and the stewards and the race director, in my opinion. And as it happened, you drive a car with debris falling off, of course the safety car is going to come out.
Yeah.
So but at the heat of the moment, that was what they were thinking, that needs to be jumped upon for sure.
100%. Should have parked it up if safety is a thing, as it should be in F1. Absolutely should have parked it up. Go on then, Mr. Windsor. As we round third base, let's talk about the most discussed topic since the Canadian Grand Prix, being one Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton and his treatment at the hands of Toto Wolff's Mercedes. Lots of the community saying that Lewis, in his final season with the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth, is now being mistreated. A couple of things that have been bandied around. First, they say, why didn't they put him on the mediums? Second, they say, well, okay, if there were no mediums, why didn't they put him on the softs? And third, they'll say, surely, if just leave him out ahead of George Russell, all of the aforementioned, some say, are proof positive that Toto is mistreating / sabotaging Lewis Hamilton's efforts in 2024. To that, Mr. Windsor, you say?
Mm-hmm. Well, I say, I think he sabotaged Lewis's efforts when he signed George Russell instead of Valtteri Bottas. And in my opinion, I think Mercedes couldn't have gone a lot further after Abu Dhabi 21 to try to get that sorted. So that was, I wouldn't have called that sabotage, but I would call that sort of fairly wet response to what Lewis was obviously needing at the time. And so I think what happened in Canada and what's supposedly happening now is a bit nonsensical for people to criticize, because Lewis is doing a good job. I mean, you could argue, well, if they're that against Lewis, why are they giving him any of the upgrades at all? Why aren't they just keeping him in the car as it was at the start of the year? I mean, they obviously want the guy to go as well as he can possibly go and win a Grand Prix if he can. So they're giving him a car that is getting better all the time. And obviously those criticisms about the tire choice are ridiculous, because we know, as you've said, there were no mediums left. The soft was never going to go the distance. And as for whether you bring him in or don't bring him in, that's all part of strategy, which can benefit some drivers one day and other drivers others. I mean, the only thing you could say maybe was they could have got on the blower and said to George, hold position, don't pass Lewis. But why would they do that if George's he's on different tires and he's going quicker at the time and had a chance maybe to catch the McLaren? So, Lewis put up a bit of a fight. But I have to say, I didn't think Lewis was actually going to get passed by George. I thought Lewis was going to be able to do it. But of course, DRS is such a pain in the neck these days that inevitably it was going to happen. And that's why I don't like DRS, to be honest. But anyway, that's just me. But Lewis set fastest lap at the end. The tires were okay in the end. He came in and he did the job. But it was, I don't think you can say the sabotage. I mean, that's rather, childish rubbish, isn't it? People saying that.
Talk to me about sabotage in F1, Peter, because, I mean, as Nigel was about to embark on his IndyCar career in his final year in F1, did you ever suspect that Nigel was on the receiving end of less than equal treatment.
No. I mean, he at Ferrari, he's convinced that they switched chassis numbers on his car just before the British Grand Prix, and he was running Prost's spare car instead of his race car. I think that's what he thinks. I don't know that for a fact. I'd be very, very surprised if that was actually the case, but he might have heard that from the odd mechanic or two. It's certainly, in my experience at Williams, it's absurd even to think that the word sabotage would even apply in any dimension at any era. No way. I mean, the teams, and this applies today, I think the teams spend so much money and have so many people working just to allow two guys to go racing on a Sunday afternoon. Are they going to do anything deliberately to hurt the opportunity for either of them to perform at their maximum? Of course they're not. And so that's all a work of fiction, and it's a work of people who've come into the sport sideways, probably halfway through, without any real knowledge of what they're talking about.
Jeez, preach, Peter. It is an interesting one though, because Lewis keeps saying that he thinks something is going on without necessarily saying. He's spoken ad infinitum now, season to date, about being quick in free practice and then that all of a sudden disappearing in quali. Now, I think there were explains to that. There was a massive track temperature drop between free practice and qualifying that maybe Lewis didn't adapt for. But Lewis is kind of, I feel like Lewis is wrestling with his own mortality. 39, soon to be 40 years old, having lost 8-1 in qualifying head to head with his teammate. I feel like we're seeing Lewis struggling with it.
What's going on is that Lewis is leaving the team and George Russell is the chosen driver for the future. And inevitably, even if Lewis doesn't want to think about that on a daily basis, inevitably it seeps into everybody's psyche at Mercedes. And so how can it not have an effect? Of course it has an effect. Now, the question is, from Lewis's point of view, does it actually have an effect on his driving? Probably not. But then remember, the Mercedes still doesn't have that big a sweet spot in terms of operation. We've seen George had some pretty bad runs as well this year. And what's happening is that in certain situations, with the compound selection that Pirelli have given the teams for that weekend and the setup they're running, on a Friday, maybe more than on a Saturday, Lewis's basic sweet spot is okay. And then things have changed. As you say, the track's picked up grip. I mean, the corollary of that is that Max tends not to be that good on a Friday. So, and usually what Max is doing Q2 on Saturday afternoon has no relation to what people are seeing Max doing halfway through FP2 on a Friday. So things do change. And Lewis typically has been better on a Friday than qualifying as a trend. But I say that some of that in terms of Mercedes and his teammate is that when it comes down to doing the lap in Q2 or Q3 or whatever it is, and they're on that one set of soft tires, if the car's not quite right, as I've always said, I think George is always going to get a little bit more out of it because he's a young, extremely fast racing driver with nothing to lose except beating Lewis Hamilton. What's Lewis's motivation if he's getting in the car and it feels slightly different to FP3 and suddenly he's got flick oversteer where he didn't have it before? He's a 7 times world champion with enough road dust on him to say, there's something odd here. I'm going to, try and work out what this is and get onto the radio. He doesn't just drive through it as George will. And that's the difference. And that's part of, and then if you multiply that with Lewis also leaving the team, then you've got this sort of snowballing effect of what's going on. But even if Lewis wasn't leaving Mercedes, I think things would look exactly as they are.
Wow. Is that what you've described just there, Peter? Not necessarily being past your prime, but Father Time being undefeated, undisputed. As you get to 39, 40 years old, you kind of start to have a different perspective. I remember Nigel spoke.
No, it's not an age. It's not an age thing at all. It's a 7 world championship thing.
Oof.
It's, I've done this. I know how to do it, and I don't need to prove myself. And I will win the Grand Prix when the car allows me to win the Grand Prix. It's that. Whereas for George Russell, it is, I'm going to drive this thing flat out every lap because I'm so glad I'm in Formula One driving for Mercedes, and I'm going to show that Lewis Hamilton. It's that. It's a 2 different thing. And so, for Lewis, it's nothing to do with his age. I think his talent is absolutely there, 100%. And I think we'll see that at Ferrari. It's all to do with the amount of success he's had. And you think about the number of world champions who've gone off the boil, having won one title, let alone 2 or 3. And Lewis is exceptional. He's unique, the only driver in the world who's managed to sustain that level of motivation and speed with that amount of success behind him. It's incredible that he's as good as he is even now. And for anybody to think that he's slightly off, they don't understand human psyche, or they don't understand human athleticism.
Oh, I've hinted at it, Peter, if only because they say that when you get into the upper echelons of like 30 years old, right, that symptomatic of you kind of being not past your prime, not over the hill necessarily, but not in your optimal, not in the optimal stage of your biological, like your peak fitness, that the first thing to go is a tenth of pace, right? And if I look at the season to date, the fact that Georgia, if I try and understand it and explain it, the fact that Georgia's winning 8-1 season to date in qualifying, I'm thinking surely maybe not that's not the entire explain. That's not just the root cause, but do you not think, Peter, that goes into
No, I
it?
don't. I think from the minute they signed George, well, from the minute with George in the team, and it was clear that the car was not a great car, I thought George would out-qualify him every race. Didn't worry me, because I knew Lewis would be able to come back. And I knew it would only be a matter of a few tenths anyway. And Lewis would, in race situations, would definitely have his day of being in very good shape. But I thought that was totally predictable that would happen. But it didn't change the way I thought about Lewis at all. I mean, to get down to brass tacks, it's a known fact that the human athlete is at its peak at the age of 19. So everything is going off slightly after they're 19 years of age. Depends on the sport, obviously. The first thing to go, you say a tenth, yeah, but why a tenth? The first thing to go in a racing driver is the peripheral vision, nothing else. Peripheral vision is the first thing. And I don't think Lewis has any problem whatsoever with peripheral vision. I mean, think about Jack Brabham, how quick he was at 44 against Jochen Rindt, the fastest driver on the planet in 1970. And Jack Brabham was there racing wheel to wheel with Jochen Rindt and beating him, age 44. No problem with his peripheral vision at all. No problem with Lewis Hamilton's peripheral vision, for sure. He's perfectly okay physically. The only issue is I've won 7 world championships. I didn't want George in the other car. It is a pain having him in the other car. I'd be much more comfortable if I had Valtteri, but I've got to live with that. But living with that is a pain. And then beyond that, the car's not an easy car to get the best from day in, day out. That's the other issue. It's a bit better now than it was, but it's still by no means a McLaren or a Red Bull, or even a Ferrari on a good day. So that's the issue. And so don't worry about Lewis. He's got his life sorted, because he's going to McLaren and he's going to Ferrari, and he's got his life sorted. He's going to Ferrari, and he will love that part of his career, and he'll drive beautifully, I'm sure.
Oh, Mr. Windsor, I pray to the racing gods that you're all right. But I'm being a statistical, putting on my old accounting cap. I just worry that the likes of Jack and Giuseppe Farina and Juan Manuel Fangio in 1957 are the exception, the 40-year-old exceptions that prove the rule as far as the only chaps.
Well, they're exceptions, Cam, only because they were there. A lot of them didn't make it, sadly, in those eras, because it was so dangerous. But Damon Hill wasn't exactly young, was he? No, there's no problem physically. There's no problem at all. Less problem now than ever because of the fitness level that the drivers sustain. And Lewis is, for sure, works flat out on his fitness as much now as he ever did. So probably more. I don't know, but probably more. So he's fine physically, for sure.
I'll take that.
And he will have his day as well against Charles Leclerc.
Let's go, Peter. That makes me a very, very happy man to hear that.
You can rest in happily going into the winter that Lewis is going to have a good year next year.
Let's go. Right, that's my story then, Peter, and I'm sticking to it. Listen, mate, you've been more than generous with your time as always. Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. My pleasure as ever.
Listen, if you enjoy hearing Mr. Peter D. Windsor wax lyrical as always about all things Formula One, do yourselves a favour, go and subscribe to that chap's YouTube channel, and then shortly thereafter, Short Corners podcast on all good podcasting platforms. 5 stars and follow. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, be sure to drop a like, comment and subscribe. If you're listening on a podcasting platform, 5 stars and follow as always. Mr. Peter D. Windsor, you've been a legend. Thank you as always for the time. I've been your boy Cameron F1, and as always, between now and next time, please remember to look but never stare.